Good evening, and you are watching Sunvalley News. Thank you so much for joining us here on our very first political panel. Tonight, we'll be speaking with Brad Viss of the Conservative Party, Nicole Bellay of the Green Party, and Tyler Niles of the People's Party. We're going to learn a little bit about what their political party stands for and how they will help our rural and Indigenous communities if elected. Thank you so much for joining us, candidates. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right, there we go. All right, our first question of the night. Tell us about your political, what your political party stands for and what you will do to support rural and Indigenous communities if elected. Nicole, we'll start with you.
Okay, so the Green Party stands, of course, for taking care, dealing with the climate change, and taking care of the people at the same time, because we know that you can't deal with the climate crisis without taking care of people. So that's our ambition, and specifically more the vulnerable people that have been left on their own in the last years, because the inequality has been growing so much in our country, the wealth inequality, sorry. And so there's many people that needs our help, and we're a rich country and we can help people and we can help the planet. And
all right.
That's our, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to Brad. Can you share what your political party stands for and what will you do to support rural and Indigenous communities if elected?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the Conservative Party is about giving every single Canadian, irregardless of their background, a foundation for success. Since my election in 2019, I've been very active in the Fraser Canyon especially. I've been pushing for more resources related to housing, and I've been working extensively with many of the First Nations in the riding to make sure that they're getting a fair deal from Ottawa. I've heard loud and clear from across the riding that a lot of the supports available in urban and suburban communities are not available for my constituents in the north, and I've been advocating strongly to make sure that rural Canada has a fair deal, that we get the requisite amount of infrastructure dollars, housing dollars out to communities like Ashcroft and Cache Creek.
All right, now moving along with Tyler. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me. The People's Party, we stand for freedom, fairness, respect, and responsibility for all Canadians. We want to see a change in smaller government. We want to see more accountability in government. We want to be able to pass more responsibility onto our First Nations communities. And we want to see an increase in infrastructure dollars given to the smaller rural communities and an increase in healthcare as well.
All right, thank you so much. Now, one of the hottest topics in our communities is that of the Ashcroft Hospital. The Ashcroft Hospital's emergency department has had many issues with temporary closures due to staffing shortages. Currently, the emergency department is only open on weekends. We'll start with Brad Viss. What action or advocating would you do for residents to have proper access to health services in rural communities?
Right. Well, first, we do have to recognize that the hospital hours and the resources allocated to the hospital fall under the jurisdiction of the provincial government. That said, the federal government does fund hospitals, and the Conservative Party has made a commitment to increase funding specifically for health. Sorry, there's a lot of background noise there.
Yeah, we've got a lot of background noise here. So if anybody is not speaking, maybe we'll get you to mute your mic. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, I've made a commitment to increase health transfers to the provinces. The one big thing on immigration, though, related to healthcare is that it's very hard to retain doctors to practice in rural Canada. The Conservative Party's made a commitment to improve skills recognition for professionals like our physicians to come to Canada and actually be able to practice the professions they were trained to do and which got them admittance into Canada for the first place. Admittedly, this is a very, very big and complicated problem, but it is something I've recognized, and it is something I've raised with my party, and it is something that we've included in our platform.
Thank you very much. Nicole? You will have to unmute your mic. No
Yes.
problem.
I always forget that.
Yeah.
So the Green wants to increase the funding for health because there are major crises in the health sector, the addictions, the mental health, and rural communities. Well, it's I understand a little bit what Ashcroft is living, because we the centralization of services have happened here too. We used to have an hospital in Mission with lots of services, and now we have to go to Abbotsford, which is only half hour compared to you have to go at least an hour to Kamloops, I believe. So, but we found some. Well, first of all, I want to say before I forget. So the Green Party wants to expand their healthcare to include mental health, addiction, and to include prevention of disease and health promotion. So the solution that we have found in Mission to get services more locally is that we get specialists to come like for a day, sometimes it's once a week and stuff like that, to bring local services. I know it, and the shortage of nurses, it's a big problem right now, and I agree with Brad. I mean, if we should try to get trained nurses to come to Canada.
All right, thank you. Tyler?
Thank you. I agree with Brad that healthcare is a provincial problem, not a federal problem. But the People's Party plan is to turn the GST collected back over to the provinces, allowing them to have the accountability to be able to increase their own shortcomings where they need to see them fit. If it's more doctors that they need, then they can hire more doctors. If it's nurses, they can hire nurses. We saw with the heat wave that we had that some people were waiting over 45 minutes for an ambulance. So clearly there is a paramedic staffing shortage and an ambulance vehicle shortage as well. So we would be looking to give provinces their own accountability on that to be able to fix their own issues, as every province has different shortcomings in their healthcare system.
All right, thank you. So when it comes to affordable housing in rural communities, both real estate and rentals, what are your priorities to combat these housing issues? This is a free-for-all. Whoever feels like taking it on first, go ahead.
I can speak about housing. I speak about housing a lot. So I conducted a study in Parliament that was published this spring that talked about rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, and which touched a lot upon the rural housing challenges that we face in the Fraser Canyon. What's abundantly clear, again, is that the National Housing Strategy, it's a $70 billion funding envelope, and rural Canada was largely excluded from most of the funding streams. I've made it a commitment to make sure that rural Canada has a fair deal and has equitable access to the programs. Right now, many like municipalities, Dana, do you live in Ashcroft, right? Or in Cache Creek?
Yeah.
In Cache Creek. So in a small town like Cache Creek, there's one essential full-time administrator. And for that one administrator to apply for any housing dollars from the federal government, it's going to take weeks and weeks of work. So the programs aren't working for municipalities and communities without the resources to devote large amounts of time and money just to be able to apply. So we have to simplify, we have to cut red tape, and we have to make the programs, we have to make CMHC and the federal government going to the small communities and working with them directly versus the small communities spending all of their time and money hoping they might have a project reviewed. In one case, I know of one town, they spent for $150,000. They had over 750 pages of paperwork to fill out to get $150,000 just to do capacity funding. So there's a lot of things that we can do to improve the administration of funds and make sure that they're available to rural Canada. Many of the funds for housing and for homelessness and housing coordinators that are present in 60 of the largest communities in Canada weren't accessible to rural communities, and we need to make sure that they have access to the same resources and that capacity as well.
All right. Thank you, Brad. Tyler, would you like to follow up?
Yes, I would. Our plan with housing is similar and different. We plan to reduce immigration rates from the 400,000 to 100 to 150, which will free up housing in the big cities because there are less refugees and immigrants moving there. And in doing so, that will alleviate the strain on rural communities where people are leaving big cities to go to rural communities because there is no affordable housing in them. And that if there's less people moving to rural communities, then the people that are already living there are not able to afford a house because there are less people driving up the prices in rural communities. I know my wife and I had looked at moving to Princeton prior to this, and we've seen properties there have increased exponentially compared to what they were 2 years ago. Aside from that, we also think that the provincial governments need to work on changing their municipal and zoning bylaws to make it easier and more streamlined for builders to get their permits, to build their properties, to build houses, condos, and the like in both rural and municipal communities. And in doing so, streamlining that process will decrease the interest paid on empty lots, which will decrease the overall cost of the house passed on to the end user.
All right, Nicole.
The federal government not stop completely, but decrease greatly the funding of social housing and co-op housing, nonprofit housing in the 1980s. And this is one of the main issues that we're living right. It's not the only reason why it's so unaffordable, but one big reason is because it hasn't been funded. So we want to restore that funding. And we want to refocus the mandate of CMHC towards supporting nonprofit housing instead of supporting investment, mostly investment in housing. The housing is getting it's more like an investment than a right, and so it should change. And the Green wants to prioritize the housing as a human right. And also we want to create national standard to establish rent and vacancy controls, because right now it's it's just as soon as somebody is getting out of a rental, the price is jacked up so much, and so it becomes unaffordable. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So going into what your commitments are to assist rural communities from future disasters such as flooding and values, can you share a little bit about your commitments to assist in that? Nicole, we'll start with you.
To assess my commitment to climate, Sorry,
I'll ask the question again. What are your commitments to assist rural communities for future natural disasters such as flooding and wildfires?
Yes. So first of all, I want to address the root cause of these disasters, and so address the climate change. But I think that that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear about how to protect in the future, in the short future, I guess, if we don't do anything, how to protect these rural. And we need to establish some funding, I think, for disaster. And we have to, because right now, I know that Lytton is living, the resident of Lytton that lost their house are in a very bad situation. They don't know what's going on. They have no communication. They can't go to their property. It's been 75 days, and they haven't been helped. It's terrible. And I know that it's partly because of the election, and it's not because of yeah.
All right, we'll keep moving forward. Tyler, what are what are the commitments that you can offer to assist rural communities for from future natural disasters?
Thank you. We need to do better with our forest management. We need to work on clearing the deadfall and the blowdown that we get every year, because that's just sitting there dry as tinder, waiting to start a forest fire or fuel a forest fire. We need to stop the spraying and the painting of deciduous trees that grow faster. They produce return on a crop faster in a tree farm, and they also are slower to burn as they hold a lot more water, and they provide coverage and food for a wide variety of wildlife. We need to work on our forestation. We need to work on moving less by train and more by pipeline, as we know that trains do start a fair amount of fires on their own. And with flooding, we need to work on our erosion control outside of highways by letting deciduous trees grow instead of spraying and poisoning them off to plant carnivorous trees, which are a fuel source for fires.
Thank you, Tyler. Brad?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is address active forest management. In 2017, of course, there was the elephant fire, and really what has been done. I've been pushing for some of the resources being committed already by the federal government to make sure that they got to communities in the Fraser Canyon to start doing that active forest management work that many of the Indigenous communities want to participate in, and frankly know what they're doing, because many of those are the people on the ground fighting the fires in the first place. So first thing we need to do is empower Indigenous Canadians, give them more resources. I've tried to do as much as that as possible through the Canada Summer Jobs Program, but we need to look at active forest management practices. When we start addressing the forest management practices and getting trees planted again, over time, the risk of flood, specifically on the Bonaparte, will be reduced. But there is a lot of land-based issues up in the Fraser Canyon that need a lot more attention. And I'm committed to working with all the communities like I have been to make sure that we're making some progress. But there is a lot to do, and it's not the best situation we found ourselves in right now.
All right, you brought up the next question, referring to Indigenous issues. In our Indigenous communities, we've heard a lot of promises and commitments to Indigenous issues with not a lot of action. What commitments will you make when it comes to Indigenous issues? Tyler, let's start with you.
Thank you. We've seen throughout history that many injustices have been committed by many different Canadian governments towards the Indigenous people. We aren't able to change the past, but we can look forward to the future. And a People's Party government wants to start by rewriting the Indian Act. It keeps Indigenous people in a state of dependency on the government and controls most aspects of their life. We want to create a new legal framework with input from Indigenous members from all communities across Canada that creates a fair and self-reliant communities. And an Indian Act that supports them. We also want to promote freedom in their communities by giving them the same amount of funding that they receive, but removing the government oversight so that they have their own accountability to again fix the issues that they have in their community, whether it's it's internal healthcare or water supply or housing. And then we also want to look at opening up avenues for potential homeownership within Indigenous communities, because that will give them a greater self-esteem and more control over their lives.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So turning back again to the housing study I did this spring, the biggest thing that came out of that study was a commitment from the Conservative Party to come forward and work with Indigenous people, to empower Indigenous people to create a for Indigenous, by Indigenous housing strategy. You're right, Dana, to point out that there's a lot of lip service to reconciliation. But there hasn't been always a lot of action. I understand this, and I've been working from day one to build trust, and that's an ongoing process for me with the 31 Indigenous bands in Mission-Matsqui-Fraser Canyon. But I think it has to start with some of the basics of life. Get the federal government out of the way, empower Indigenous Canadians to have control over their own unique housing needs. And finally, Bonaparte, just past Cache Creek, is part of the Secwépemc Nation, and they were impacted by the residential schools. And I think the federal government can move a lot faster. And frankly, we would have seen some action had the Liberals not called an election to implement calls to action 71 to 76 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And many of those commitments talked about working to improve education, to make sure that all of the sites where former residential schools were are are reviewed so there's no more unmarked graves. But there's a lot of work to do, and I'm committed to working with everyone in my riding to move forward and hopefully earn people's trust.
Thank you. And to Nicole.
Yes, we have to. There's many reports that have been written by great people. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the National Inquiry about Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, the Royal Commission. So there's many reports and not too many action. So the Green Party is committed to respect, to follow these call of action, and to respect the self-determination of the Indigenous people. And so there, more precisely, we need to develop sooner than later and implement an urban, rural, northern Indigenous housing plan that is inclusive and culturally appropriate and guided by Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. We need to increase funding for Friendship Center that bringing essential services to the off-reserve people. There's so much concrete step that in the Green Party, but it's mostly a thing of trust, actually. Like, who's going to do it, actually? Because I think the answer, the calls for action are there, and it's more like a trust. Yeah.
Our community members here locally have been affected by the residential school system here in Bonaparte First Nation, Ashcroft First Nation, Linton First Nation. What steps will you take to hear the concerns of Indigenous communities that have been impacted by residential schools, and to hear what changes that they would like to see here in our communities? Or perhaps you've already done so.
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Yeah, so after the discovery at the Kamloops Residential School, I was having a staff meeting in Mission, and because of COVID, we were doing it outside at Heritage Park in Mission, and I met some survivors from St. Mary's School, and I went out. They were doing a healing ceremony, and I went up to them when they were finished, and I asked them, "Listen, I got to speak on this in Parliament tomorrow night. What words should I bring forward?" And they said to me that we need to actually fulfill some of those promises from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and make sure that there's proper trauma counseling in place for many Indigenous people. Seeing the Kamloops opened up a lot of wounds they thought they had had healed. And so it brought a lot of bad memories back. And the federal government, I believe, has a duty of care to make sure that those supports are in place. Again, we shouldn't have had this election, and we should have been working on that. the second thing I did was there was a parade organized by many Indigenous survivors of residential schools in the riding. I went and participated, and some of the survivors asked to put forward a petition, and I asked in that petition for the federal government to immediately fund the archaeological work at all residential schools across Canada, in addition to some of those other points I made. But I moved quickly to bring the concerns of my Indigenous constituents forward at their request, and I was happy to work with them, and I'm going to continue working with them if I earn their trust again and win this election.
All right. And have you spoken with any of our local officials, our local government officials, to see what action they're making to do reconciliation or apologies to our local Indigenous groups?
I can't say I have asked other levels of government about what they're doing. Frankly, the summer was so busy with the forest fires that all of my attention was focused on the Treasury Board submissions I was trying to get done with Lytton First Nation and the village of Lytton in July, 2 weeks after much of the debate on the residential schools was taking place. So my focus shifts solely to forest fires.
All right, Nicole, let's hear from you.
I think that we need to listen to the people. We need to educate still our non-Indigenous Canadian to listen to more of the story of the Indigenous people.
All right, and then, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And so there's a few things we can do. Of course, is directly affected to the residential school is to fund the research for finding the burial, the unmarked graves of the kids all over Canada. And we have to also provide some kind of help for all the victims, because it's very traumatic. We have to ask the Pope to apologize, and we have to stop, of course, fighting Indigenous people in court.
Well, the question would be, what steps would you personally make to hear the concerns of local Indigenous communities that have been impacted directly by the residential school system?
Okay, so
to hear our local issues.
Well, I'm a facilitator of restorative justice, and so I would be passionate about participating in a circle in discussing the residential school, if something that I would love to do anyway. That would, yeah.
Okay, and Tyler.
I think that all conflict resolution starts with a meeting and getting to hear the all sides of the stories, or the survivor sides. I personally haven't had a chance to meet and speak with anyone, but I would like to. I'd like to hear their stories and what they want to see changed and what they want to see done going forward to prevent tragedies like this in the future. I believe that I agree with Brad that we need to have more counseling available for the trauma and that they've experienced. I imagine it's a very traumatic experience to have to relive it all over again. And I think that we could be doing more, but I believe it does start with a base of trust. Because we don't have the greatest history in the Canadian government of dealing fairly with our First Nations.
All right. Now, like in urban locations in British Columbia, our rural communities have seen an increase in drug overdoses. We're seeing an opioid crisis and increased crime. What is your plan to offer support and services to combat these issues in rural communities? Who would like to take the lead?
I can go again.
Okay.
Well, one of the main pillars of the Conservative platform is recognizing that we have a mental health and addictions crisis in this country. We've committed to constructing 50 treatment centers across Canada with wraparound services to help people with the opioid addiction that is plaguing our province and led to more deaths than COVID-19. We have not treated this problem with the amount of attention it deserves, and that's a stain on the back of Canada, in my opinion. Regarding rural crime, the Conservative Party in this, and I've heard this loud and clear in Cache Creek, in Ashcroft, in Lillooet especially, and even in the Bridge River Valley, that there are RCMP response times are woefully inadequate. So we've committed to developing a rural crime strategy to ensure that response times, especially by the RCMP, are sufficient. I hear a lot of frustration up in the canyon about not even being able to access a police officer on a regular basis if someone's in a really rural area. And I think that the federal government has a role in conjunction with the provincial government to address this problem through stronger laws that guarantee a level of service and quality for all Canadians, irrespective of region. And we're not doing that right now.
Nicole, would you like to follow up?
Yes. So regarding the opioid crisis, it's increasing every year. It's been called an emergency in BC 5 years ago, and we have not done enough. So we need to offer way more rehab treatment center. But first of all, to save life, we have to make a safe supply. And so we have to decriminalize the possession of drug, personal possession of drug, and to make sure that the supply is safe so people don't lose their life. And regarding the whole support system is that, well, the Green Party wants to make communities more vibrant, more services. And so we want to double the funding, have a funding that is that you can count on and not looking for grant every time. And so that, provide services for kids. It starts with, offering them a rec center and stuff like this, things to do. And so we believe that, if you provide with your kid, for your kids, in a community, everything will work better for everybody.
All right. Thank you, Nicole and Tyler.
The opioid crisis is an emergency that was either potentially overlooked or wasn't deemed as big an issue as it was. I feel that they've, more people have passed away from overdoses than they have from COVID, and they treat COVID more as a emergency issue than they do the opioid crisis, when the deaths are exponential and the overdoses are exponential. We need to have tougher sentences for criminals convicted of smuggling and importing opiates, and we need to get better at having resource centers for those who are affected by drugs and alcohol and overdoses. With rural crime, we need to add more police officers. That would certainly help the issue, and with response times and access to police officers. But again, we also need to be tougher on criminals who are committing these crimes, as most of them are released on notices to appeal shortly after they are arrested. And that's not going to solve the issue if they can continue their crime sprees.
All right. Thank you so much. I would say, though, also we would have to look at some of the underlying issues that cause an increase in crime. Is that not an accurate point?
Yeah. Yes, certainly.
Okay. Go ahead.
Do you want me to go ahead? Yeah. Sure. Okay.
And anyone can have a point to make. Go ahead, Tyler.
Oh, okay, sure. I'm sure a lot of the underlying issues with drug and alcohol abuse is either going back to a home situation. Sorry?
Or crime.
Oh, crime. And crime, or drug, alcohol, and crime. They do all tie in. And I'm sure a lot of it does come down to either, rough upbringings or abuse at home or abuse at work or feeling of shortcoming. I think it also derives from a mental health issue instead of a mental health state. I think we need to get better at recognizing that and providing the mental health support to rural communities where it's needed to help alleviate this strain on the system.
Go ahead, Tyler. Or sorry, go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, in respect to some of the underlying causes, our platform commits to a gang exit strategy that would apply more broadly, and increasing RCMP resources on gang-related crime. More specifically, a second point I'd like to make on the mental health and addictions piece is that one thing a lot of my constituents with the First Nations background say is that we need culturally appropriate care. And our platform also has a commitment to First Nations culturally appropriate strategies to help those dealing with opioid addictions who are Indigenous to receive specific Indigenous care as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. We see how all these situations, including colonialism and racism, can be related to an increase in addiction, increase of crime. So I'm not sure if sending people to or cracking down harder on crime is necessarily the right approach. Considering I believe that there is a higher rate of Indigenous people in the prison system, as well as overcrowding. Or am I missing something here?
Yeah, that's right. About 50%. So in prison are represented Indigenous people. So yes, we have to. The discrimination is one reason. Racism, poverty, a lack of meaningful job, and many other reasons.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Oh, did I cut you off? I'm sorry, Nicole. Continue.
Yeah, I just want to say that one way of trying to improve the situation of people is we have a huge wealth inequality in our society. And so we need to go get the fair share of taxation from some people, some corporation that are not paying, and to bring it to our social, to take care of people.
Okay, go ahead.
And you want me to continue? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. We're getting lots of comments here. Can you repeat a little bit of what you were saying?
Repeat the inequality?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the Green Party wants to go get, redistribute the wealth in our country.
Right. You were talking about taxing people that needed to be taxing. Are you talking about taxing churches?
Oh, I never thought about it, actually. Good question. Taxing, the church don't pay tax. That's a good, that we should bring it up.
Right.
Why not?
Okay.
Good point.
So moving on to our next question. Rural communities regularly already see issues with unemployment and also lack of jobs. Add a pandemic to an already prominent issue. How will your party support employment opportunities after COVID-19? Brad, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I've been working very closely with Barbara at Community Futures in Ashcroft on COVID-19 supports and hearing what's needed in the Fraser Canyon region for all constituents as we move past COVID-19. I think many people will be pleased with our extension of the CEBA loan to $200,000. And also what's really important for communities like Ashcroft and Cache Creek is the capital investment Kickstart program that we're talking about that will give people a tax credit of up to $25,000 when they're making capital investments in their business. Right now, we need to give small businesses the tools they need to move past COVID-19 and to get people back to work. And that's why another commitment we've made is to supplement the salaries for people up to 50% who've been off work because of COVID-19 for the last 6 months or more. Labor is a big problem, but if we make the right policy changes, we can encourage people back into the workforce and attract new talent, irrespective of community, to get people going and get communities moving again.
Thank you, Brad. And moving on to Tyler.
We do need to get people back to work. We need to get them off government subsidies and get them off government reliance through their COVID CERB. We are looking to end all of those government handout plans that were initiated at the beginning of the pandemic to get people back to work. And we want to open up our provincial areas with the repealing of any COVID passports so that people can travel and tour. A lot of rural communities rely on tourists passing through to help in their attractions and use their restaurants. And so we want to see more movement through provinces of Canadians touring our beautiful country and seeing our beautiful rural cities, as well as getting all of our workers back to work and back to paychecks.
Thank you so much, Tyler. And Nicole.
The transition to the clean economy is a great employment maker. So we want to invest in renewable energy, and all these projects are very local, very small projects everywhere across BC. We want to retrofit all our houses to make them more efficient. So lots of trade skill job again. And we want to invest in transportation. So a lot of rail public transit. And for the rural, it's important to have also a bus system to commute from between communities, for sure. One of the key policies of the Green Party is to the guaranteed livable income, and it would end poverty to millions of people right now that lives below the poverty line. It would encourage work. It has been proven that it does encourage work if you don't claw back right away the money. It promotes health. It increases entrepreneurship. It simplifies the administration of the program because it's a universal program. Okay, everybody gets the money, and it can grow the economy more than it costs.
All right.
So we're all about the guaranteed livable income and the transition to the clean economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if we're talking about supporting employment opportunities after COVID-19, we are also seeing having to issue a vaccine passport or a vaccine card. Will that affect employment for those that may not want to provide a vaccine passport?
I can answer that question. First off, the vaccine passport program that we're seeing provincially is run by the provincial government. I know the PPC likes to say they're going to repeal it, but if they're going to respect the Constitution, they can't repeal it because they can't tell John Horgan what to do. I think there's lots of problems with the vaccine passport being implemented here. Despite Tyler saying I support the provincial program, that's a falsehood, and I know he put it online today as well. That's not true. The provincial program has a lot of questions that need to be asked, and Adrian Dix and the local MLAs need to be accountable to all residents about the implications of people's privacy, how it applies to people who are immunocompromised, and how it applies to people who may be pregnant and can't take the vaccine. So our provincial counterparts have a lot to answer as it relates to this program and its issuance.
Tyler.
Yes, I know that the federal government can't dictate what provincial governments do, but they are allowed to sit down and have discussions with them and clear the air on certain things. I would like to say that I haven't said anything about the Conservatives or Brad Viss's stance on the matter. I would like to see, I will check on the social media to see where that was posted or who said that, because I don't always post on my own social media. As well, the Conservative government is for vaccine passports. I don't know Brad Viz's take on it. He hasn't made a statement on it, but I know that the representative for the Conservative Party in the Yukon was removed from his position after he would not retract statements he had made on the passports. I know that the federal government can't control that, but we do see that it isn't a necessary thing because people can't take the vaccines for certain reasons, either for health reasons already, autoimmune deficiencies, or if they're pregnant, or if they have any religious reasoning.
Mm-hmm. So wouldn't that affect then the employment opportunities after COVID-19 if certain people were expected to have that vaccine?
Well, I don't think it shouldn't affect your employment status. What your healthcare should be your own private business, and what you and your doctor discuss is covered by privacy, and therefore that shouldn't relate to you being employed or not. It comes down to it's discrimination, essentially. So you're discriminating based on your vaccine status, or you're discriminating on your gender or your race. Employers shouldn't be allowed to discriminate that way.
All right.
A mandate is not a law.
All right, and Nicole.
So the federal government only can mandate international travel, a passport for that. So, but if you want to know the Green position about the passport is that we believe in vaccines, of course, because we are science-based. We take our decision on science, but we also recognize that for different reasons, and it could be cultural, it could be medical or others. Some people don't want to take a vaccine, and we respect that, and we would go with the testing. There's another word. The rapid testing. Yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right. Well, this is the topic that is a favorite of the Green Party. What commitments will you make when it comes to addressing climate change, both locally and nationwide?
Yeah. Should I charge? I should probably
go ahead, Nicole.
Start. My favorite topic. Yes. Well, the climate change is, for many, 80% of the Canadian, is number one issue, and but our voting poll shows that the Liberal and the Conservative have a majority of the vote, and I don't understand that. There's so many contradiction in the other party's platform when it concerns to climate change, because as we know, the Canadian agency, energy agency, told us we can't build more fossil fuel project. And so when you're expanding fossil fuel, when you're buying pipeline, when you are giving tax money to the fossil fuel industry, you can't deal with the climate. You're not dealing with the problem, you're just amplifying it. And so we need to deal with the climate change right now. That's what the IPCC are saying, and every expert. And so the Green Party would stop the fossil fuel subsidies. They would stop any LNG or Trans Mountain project. They would take the money from stopping the subsidy to retrain workers in the field of fossil fuel. And then we would invest heavily in clean energy, in retrofitting all the buildings to make them more efficient, energy efficient, investing in transportation, because we need to get out of our cars, we need to electrify, we need to have rail system that is electrified, we need to Stop cutting our old growth also, of course. Yes, I'll give the chance to other people to
All
talk
right,
to,
let's move.
but there's a lot to do. It's very exciting. Yes.
All right, thank you so much, Nicole. Let's move on to Tyler.
Thank you, Dana. Our climate plan is a little bit different. We've seen that the oceans have only risen 1 millimeter since the last ice age, and they are on trajectory to continue to raise only 1 millimeter a year. The goal of the climate accord is to lower the temperature of the Earth in 100 years by 0.1 degree. They don't specify if that's 0.1 degree of what today's temperature is or 0.1 degree of what the temperature is in 100 years. We want to remove ourselves from the Paris Accord. We're going to stop sending billions of dollars to developing countries that are working on their climate change. We are going to abolish the Liberal government's carbon tax plan, and we will leave it up to the provincial governments to adopt programs to reduce emissions if they want to. We want to invest in adaptation strategies if and when problems arise as a result of any natural climate change. And we want to implement practical solutions to make Canada's air, water, and soil cleaner and bring clean drinking water to all remote First Nations communities. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tyler. We'll move along to Brad.
Yeah, I'll just put this up here a second. Tyler Niles has attributed a position to me based off a quote from another politician, and I don't think he's authorized to use the Conservative Party logo and attributing a quote to me without actually having a quote. Tyler, I respect you.
Brad,
I think you're an honest guy, and that's I just had to raise that. But I do think you're an honest man, and you'll take care of that because you're a person of integrity. So you can find that on your Facebook page. And on climate change, the Conservative Party, if we look at specifically a Mission-Matsqui-Fraser Canyon, we had 3 of the hottest temperatures ever recorded in Canada this summer in our riding. One of the big commitments from the Conservative Party is stuff we've already talked about in this debate, and that's natural climate change solutions, which include active forest management and making sure that the estuaries of the Thompson and the Fraser are protected and those ecologically sensitive areas are protected. More broadly on our environmental plan, it was costed and analyzed by a third party, and it's one of the most comprehensive plans ever put forward by the Conservative Party. We want to work in terms of in looking at industrial emissions from a North American perspective, and also to look at how we can use technology to improve our environmental outcomes. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Now, previous to this discussion, I asked you all the question of the Assembly of First Nations issued First Nations issued a document entitled The Healing Path Forward. This is the 2021 Federal Priorities for Strengthening and Rebuilding First Nations. Now, have you read this document or have you heard about this document prior to me letting you know about it?
No, I have not.
No, I've not.
Okay, so the top 5 priorities that the AFN has released are these areas. It's truth, reconciliation, and healing for First Nations and all Canadians, climate and conservation leadership with First Nations, economic growth, prosperity, and wealth building for First Nations, promoting peace by respecting First Nations jurisdiction, rebuilding and strengthening First Nations, and First Nations seeking all federal parties willing to be willing, ready, and able to commit to working with our leadership to build a stronger Canada. So as First Nations people are stating this, are you? And how can you share that you are willing to work with First Nation communities?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we need to address in our riding right away is the rebuilding that needs to take place in Lytton. And whoever is the MP after September 20th, that needs to be their number one priority. We had one of the worst disasters ever in Canada. This summer, when I was meeting with Chief Janet Webster, it's very clear that the contract the federal government had signed with provincial emergency services was not sufficient. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done on rebuilding Lytton First Nation and giving them the capacity that they need again, as the federal government is funded in other situations as well. So there is some very practical things that need to be happening right away in our riding to address some of those key objectives of the AFN, and I'm committed to doing so.
Nicole.
Yes, I am ready and happy to work with First Nation. I would be so honored to having collaboration with them and working equal to equal. Thank you.
And Tyler.
Thank you. I agree that we do need to get Lytton, their community, rebuilt, and the town as well. We also need to get clean drinking water to any rural, remote First Nations communities that don't have it already. And we need to work on helping with the mental health issues in all rural communities, not just First Nations communities.
All right. Well, we are almost at the 1 hour mark. Thank you so much to all the candidates that have joined us tonight here on Sunvalley News. Thank you for taking the time to share your political parties and what you hope to do to help our communities. Thank you so much for your time. Is there any last words that anybody would like to share? Yeah, don't all rush at once.
Thanks for having us, Dana.
All right.
Thank you for the thoughtful questions, the thought-provoking discussion. It was nice to be able to have another meeting with the two of you this time. And Brad, I'd like to have a discussion after if you can. I'm not sure where that was posted, but yeah, thank you for having us. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Oh, I think you're muted there, Brad.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you for that, Tyler, and I appreciate that point. Again, Dana, great questions tonight, great discussion, and this is what elections are all about: is getting together and sharing ideas. And all the respect to my other panelists.
Thank you, Dana, for organizing and to ask some stimulating questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for also respecting everybody. It was a good panel discussion. All right. Have a wonderful night, and we'll chat with you again soon.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye. I'm Dana Foster, and you've been watching Sunvalley News. This has been our first political panel. If you have any questions, you can email me at info@sunvalleynews.ca, and I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can. We are working on having another panel discussion this Friday. We're still waiting to hear from the other candidates. We haven't had a response, but we have asked them, we have emailed to speak with them for another political panel discussion this Friday. So again, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, just email me at info@sunvalleynews.ca. Have a wonderful night.